All right, good evening. This is Jonathan Morris. I'm the facilitator for the Community Police Oversight Work Group, and I'm on Zoom with you here. I'm at Fire Station number 5, where we've held all of our meetings up to this point. And I'm joined in the room by Casey Toomey with the city, who is running the Zoom meeting for us this evening. So thank you all for being here. Very excited to see all of you and to have you here. Ironically, this is the 12th time we've all engaged together through this work, and it's the first time we've done a Zoom meeting. So there's a little bit of a learning curve for us in this context, but appreciate you all being here and being a part of this important conversation. Just a few logistics real quickly. The meeting will be archived and available on the community engagement portal with the other work group video recordings of our previous meetings. We'd like for you to remain on mute throughout until you're ready to weigh in on particular issues that we're discussing on the agenda for the work group members. This is the agenda is posted on the website of the city's website on today's events. You can click on that link and it will take you to the agenda that's posted. And the 3 items that we're going to cover tonight, just a quick welcome and updates. Then the bulk of our work this evening will be to look at the draft final report and review feedback and confirm final edits. Adopt the final report with edits if the work group members are prepared to do so. And then I want to spend a few minutes towards the end talking about our preparation for the City Commission presentation. And then the last item on the agenda for this evening is to simply talk final steps of what brings the work group's work to completion. And that specifically would be upon approval of your final draft, publishing the report so that the public and everyone has access to all the work that you've done through this process, and then a formal presentation to the City Commission, which was our ultimate task here in this work. So based on tonight's discussion, we'll be able to confirm those final dates, or at least one of those dates, and then we'll talk about what the next steps might look like. So I want to make sure that each of you members have an opportunity to weigh in and ask the questions that you need to ask so that we confirm what we need to confirm and then move forward from there. So thank you again for being here. So first item that I'd like to go through is when the work group was created by the City Commission, we were tasked as a time-limited task force to produce a set of recommendations in the form of a written formal report to be presented to the City Commission for their consideration. So we've done an extensive amount of work looking at the ordinances that created the resolution that established the work group itself, talking about our charter and the tasks assigned to us, and then how that rolls up to the larger work of the Community Police Review Board. And so the report that we will be looking at tonight is inclusive of the recommendations that you all have produced, along with a set of narratives around the complaint process. And one of the major tasks that we had was to map the current complaint process that the public can access if they wish to issue a complaint against an officer for misconduct. And so we've created a mapping of what that process looks like, and then a set of proposed recommendations for improvements to that process. And all of that is included in the report itself. And then we also have various other sections which we'll scroll through here together on the report itself. Over the past several months, since our meetings in August, when you generated potential recommendations, we've been compiling those as a group at our work meetings. And I'll talk specifically about the process and the dates for as we've done that. And so ultimately, this evening, I'd like to just go through those, make sure that we're hitting everything that we need to hit. If you have any outstanding issues that you want to speak to that we make sure that we're included in there, then this is our opportunity to do that. And should you find that we're at a point where you're ready to approve the report, then we can do that this evening with whatever edits that you recommend as understood. And with that in mind, that we'd be able to publish the report by this Thursday at the latest. So, but not to get ahead of that, we have some work to do before we get there. So with that, I just want to ask if any members have any quick questions before we weigh in, make sure that we're good to go there. Okay, and just for formality's sake, I want to confirm that we have on the call right now, we have 2 of our 3 representatives who serve on the CPRB and are also official members of this work group. The other being Member Temple, who has been corresponding with me today and had submitted all of his final edits and approval for the cumulative work that you all have created. And he has a scheduling conflict this evening, so it's unlikely that he'll be in on this call, but has already been present for that. We have, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, I believe 4 of our representatives from the police department that serve on the work group. I'm counting 3 on my screen right now. We have 4 of 4. And of the community members that serve on the work group, we have 5 community members who are not on the CPRB and specifically serve on this work group. And I see that we have 3 of the 5 currently on here now. One of whom I corresponded with recently on edits to the report itself as well. So we have a quorum established. I also want to speak to the consensus that we have around our consensus recommendations, which is a unanimous vote. And then we'll talk about any other outstanding issues related to participation here. So with that, let me pull up the document itself and I'll walk through the highlights and ask that you speak to anything that you see. Over the we met last Monday, the 5th, and did a very robust editing at that time and reconfirmed the consensus recommendations. And I just want to reach out to Member Baker and Member Turner, who were both very active in helping to produce this draft here. Member Clary, appreciate your edits in cleaning this up. And in our earlier meetings, Member Kimball Williams and Member Nance Mangler were the ones who authored the mapping using the software Whimsical. And so that's been included in here as well. And so I'm greatly appreciative of all your efforts to get us to this point. So I'm going to walk you through the report at this point, the draft as we have it, and highlight a few things from the feedback and introduce to you how we got to where we are this evening, and entertain any additional feedback that we need to speak to. So can everyone see the document okay here? All right, and this will appear in the form of a final report that will be posted on the website and then ultimately presented to the City Commission. So this is the draft that we've been working off of actively over the last several weeks, and starts with the introduction outlining our work and acknowledgements. Just want to highlight that this work ultimately stems from the public, that's what we're here to do, is to serve our community. We noted all those that we wish to thank here, including all of the formal partners that are serving on the work group. So the community reps, the police department and the LPOA and the CPRB members, along with the individuals who had specific roles in helping to prepare the draft, and critical city employees who were instrumental in supporting us throughout this effort, most notably Casey Toomey. And so all of those are acknowledged here, along with each of the 12 of you who are our work group members. Table of contents outlines all that is in here. Since we last met, we included a whole series of photos illustrating our work. There's an extensive background in here, which you've all given feedback on, that establishes how the work group came to be created, established through the City Commission. And the genesis for this, or the idea, was germinated through the City Gate study that the City Commission commissioned for the police department. One of the recommendations was to have a dedicated task force or work group to look at the CPRB specifically and make a set of recommendations accordingly. So we're an extension of that work. This also then details some history around the CPRB itself, when it came to be, some of its major accomplishments, approximate number of people who've served on that, and then also some of the notable challenges that have informed the work that we have taken on here through the work group. From there, there's context on the work group itself, and all of you weighed in on this to provide the essential background. And then the other thing that I want to note that was an important theme throughout our work and really instrumental to us being able to get to the point where we are here is that when the City Commission identified ultimately the 12 who would be serving on the work group through the respective partners identified in the establishing ordinance and resolution, there was a few initial turnover in members on that. Since we launched our first meeting May 22nd of 2023 as a work group, all 12 members have served through the duration of the project. And I very much appreciate all the work that you've all done for this. As the facilitator, I noted some of the themes and interests that each of you expressed about serving on this, and these are highlighted in this section of the report on the background. There was, to each of you, noteworthy recognition of the importance of this work for the community and for the city, a commitment and willingness to serve. And although I noted varying levels of enthusiasm about the opportunity to serve, there was a healthy dose of skepticism and recognition of the challenges and the difficult issues that we'd be taking on. Each of you expressed some idea of what success might look like for the work group and concerns for the work group. And each of you expressed some degree of curiosity about who you'd be serving with and the dynamics of having the three groups serving together. And I shared that curiosity as well. I'd only met one of you prior to taking on this role, and with any engagement, once you're all together, there's its own set of dynamics and to bring this important work forward. And so this initial background information also outlines some general interests that you expressed relative to your role on the work group. So you'll see those bulleted here, community reps, the CPRB reps, and the police department reps accordingly. And this was my attempt to just capture broadly what I heard through our initial conversations and early meetings and throughout the process. And this becomes part of the narrative woven through the report itself. From here, we have an executive summary, and you identified that for the commission's sake, to be able to consume all of this information, we needed something pithy, if you will, something condensed that captures the essence of the main ideas of what you've conveyed. So we have a 3-page executive summary, which outlines in an abstract the work that we came to do as a work group, what our charge was, a little bit of the background, and then most notably the consensus recommendations. So you generated 18 consensus recommendations. These were first put forward back in August when I asked each of you to produce a set of possible recommendations that you would like for the full group to consider, with the understanding that as a 12-person work group, we wanted to produce a set of recommendations that had the support of all 12 members. And so through a series of discussions, we generated in our August meetings approximately 48 possible recommendations that came from the 12 of you. We did a multi-voting exercise and distilled that down to these 18 with a couple of modifications that I'll highlight here shortly. And at our last meeting in August, all 12 of you confirmed that you supported these. We did a lot of tweaking on language, and it being a consensus report, we've talked about the difference between majority rules where 7 votes forces something through, if you will, and the other 5 are left to live with it, as opposed to a consensus, which essentially says all 12 of us support this. None of us probably love it. Each of us had an opportunity to contribute and had input, but ultimately we are supportive of these recommendations. So that is what you see here in the executive summary. And I will come back to this really quickly to just highlight these, but they appear on these 2 pages of the report. At the bottom, you see some photos that illustrate the work that we all engaged in together to ultimately get that to this point. But the executive summary will be the most noteworthy component of this in terms of distilling down what you're putting forward as recommendations. The next parts of the report has to do with the work group meetings, a general description of the 12 meetings that we engaged in as a work group. This is a time-limited task force, so we had a heavy lift. We originally estimated 8 meetings. That proved an insufficient number and created its own set of challenges in terms of being able to get all of this work across the finish line together. As part of our engagement, we also wanted to ensure that part of the work group's efforts involved active and robust community engagement. And so 2 of the work group meetings were dedicated to what we call community conversations that were held in July. And this is a description of the work there. I'll note that on the community engagement portal, the full discussion notes from those community engagements are available, and they include more than 300 responses were received from the first community conversation, more than 250 from the second community conversation. And you can see a description in this report of the methodology that we used to create that. But essentially we had dedicated conversation with the public where that was only community input, only community comments for the duration of those meetings. And those are responses generated. And then from that data was used to inform our subsequent discussions as a work group at a regular work group meetings. In addition, for those individuals who either could not or chose not to attend the community conversations that wanted to give input, we also had the opportunity to put out a questionnaire and captured responses from those as well. And then that became part of our discussion notes to reference as a work group. The last pieces that I will highlight, I have a couple of sections in here that put the work in a greater context. So there is a dedicated narrative that speaks to community police relations as it relates to the work of the work group and some of the lessons that we've learned from our discussions together, and also from the community conversations and the input that we received directly from the public. And so this is intended to provide some context for our work, and was an aspect of the work group's objectives. And so that's also included here. And then as the other section that I want to call your attention to is named group dynamics. And we all have been going through this together as well. And this is a description of the work that we did together. The commission specifically identified the work group needing to have members from the community, members from the CPRB, and members from the police department, all working in consort together to produce these recommendations in this report. So this is a description of the work that we did together. Through that, and for the 12 of you, how the perspectives that you brought, how you were able to navigate that accordingly, and lessons learned along the way within that. So the last pieces I want to highlight here that were the particularly heavy lift is a description of the complaint process mapping. So the city commission tasked the 12 of you with mapping the current process. This became a really robust endeavor to, first of all, capture in narrative form what the process currently is, making sure that we understand it, that we can articulate it through this format, and then ultimately produce a mapping or a flowchart version of this. And in this, since this is a draft document, I've got the watermark draft on there, but you'll see that we've created a flowchart here, and we went through this in detail of what the current process is, and then you all produced a proposed complaint and appeals process that is inclusive of all the related recommendations, consensus recommendations that you produced. So that is also in the report and will be an essential part that we present to the commission. The last feature in this report that I want to highlight that is unique to this as a consensus document is a recognition that because you generated about 47, 48 total ideas as proposed possible recommendations, ultimately you came up with 18 that were unanimous support. Yet there was a lot of important work that went into the roughly 29 other ideas that did not reach full consensus, but nonetheless were an active part of our discussion and are infused with a number of ideas that are likely worth exploring or need additional research in the future to determine the value for possible implementation. They're also useful in that there were a number of the 29 where you simply felt as a group that many of you, if not most of you, said this isn't an idea that we want to put forward, but it was important that we explored it because either it's something that we wondered about, maybe one or two of us had the idea that might be a good idea, or we learned from the community that there were similar interests and that it needed to be explored. And so this entire section, which is the lengthiest part of our final report, is a delineation of those 48 items, color-coded to indicate anything in green as a consensus recommendation, which had unanimous support. Anything in yellow was what was identified as significant support, meaning that when we did our multi-voting, it received perhaps some greens, a whole bunch of yellows, which was like a I'm somewhat supportive, or I'd like more information, but I'm not ready to vote to say it's a consensus item that we would formally recommend. And then the red items, which are non-consensus and not recommended at this point. And within the yellow and red, there were a range of opinions. There were disagreements, differences of opinion, on what might be recommended and move forward. And the accompanying narrative is an attempt to capture the context for all of that discussion. So this was a very challenging part for you all to put together on the report. It is very thorough. I don't think any of us would say it's exhaustive, although it was exhausting to produce. But the greens are the consensus recommendations, yellows and reds. Some of these were expanded on a little bit more than others, but nonetheless, you all wanted to have this in the report so that it is a reflection of the totality of your efforts and could perhaps be informative for future discussions of either additional things to consider or provide some context to understand why you didn't recommend something that maybe someone might think should be a recommendation. So that is the draft as you've produced it. Through today, as of all the feedback from noon today, I've attempted to put this all back in here. And so this should be inclusive of all of that. If I've missed anything, I need to know that. But I appreciate your active engagement over the last several days and few weeks to pull all this together. It's an impressive amount of work, and I very much appreciate all that you've done to put that forward. So with that, the total pages will end up being around 45 pages or so. So it's pretty exhaustive, and we want to hurry and make sure that this is fully inclusive of everything that you produce, so that we can get this out to the public and the city commission. So with that, I just want to take a moment to ask you all to reflect on the work that we've done to produce this report together, and just ask if anyone has anything that you want to note that either you don't see in the draft, or you want to make sure that we covered since our meeting last week, to make sure that that's included.
Yeah, Jonathan, I have two things on significant support 2.1 and significant support 3.2. A couple of the comment, or both on those comments that I made and submitted back, they didn't seem to be acted on. 2.1 specifically, it was not my understanding that the CPRB would be assisting the LPD with community outreach and support. The LPD is fully capable of doing that themselves, and I always thought that was the work group's assumption and understanding, and that any community engagement and outreach through the CPRB would be the CPRB reaching out on their own behalf. And that's how it was. If I remember correctly, that was how it was originally written, but it now says that the CPRB will offer advice to the LPD on reaching out.
Okay.
Can you repeat that consensus number, please?
It was significant support 2.1.
And we have a transcript that we can use to verify the conversation on that. So I'll look at that as well.
And then on significant support 3.2, there was a footnote that was basically that work group members felt that the DEI training should be the very first module completed, unless the city had some sort of rule that XYZ trainings need to be completed first. And that is not reflected in the final report, the draft report. And I understand if a footnote is a style choice not to have those, that's fine, included as a sentence.
Okay, that's great. So I noted, thank you, Member Baker. I noted significant support item, which would be, these are yellows that we're speaking to, 2.1. And just to put that in context too, that we need to make sure that we've captured that language. It also speaks to one of the broader challenges around, you were tasked with looking at, as a work group, this issue of what's the scope and authority of the work group, And how that's defined and interpreted is yet another extension of this work. And so I made note of that. And so I want to make sure that everybody is clear on what Member Baker has stated. And that's consistent with what we discussed earlier. And so I want to make sure that we have this in this final version. And then significant support, yellow item 3.2, the footnote about DEI training being a priority topic. And the first topic that would be part of the required training for members to serve. Anyone have any other comments or questions about those two?
Jonathan, I have just one question. I'm just curious about when yellow became significant support. Because when I remember, I just felt like that yellow is calling it significant support in the first place is misleading. I've never heard the yellow ever be significant support. Even when, your original agenda with the clarification and the discussion about what the color represented. Why did you change it to significant support?
We do, let's see, let me pull this up. We had some discussion. We went back and forth with a few different terms there. And so the question centered around, so for those items that are green, we're saying those are consensus across the board. Yellow items were items, and just to for the rest of the public viewing on this, in our August meetings, we did a multi-voting exercise and used colored dots. And of the 47 items that you all had proposed, you were each given red, yellow, and green dots, and then asked to multi-vote on those items. And the yellows became a bucket, if you will, of all those items that received maybe a few greens and a bunch of yellows, maybe a red, but typically just greens and yellows. And they didn't rise to the level of consensus, which would mean all greens. And so this bucket was meant to capture that in between. So we discussed what to call that, and some would say significant support because there was significant support within the work group that wanted to either see these issues more fully explored or were prepared to submit them as greens. But because it didn't have a full 12, it didn't make it into the greens. So I'm trying to, and I don't have those notes in front of me right now, trying to think of the other terms that we used, that we debated on what to call the yellows. And Member Turner, do you happen to remember any of the other terms that we used?
I don't remember. Go ahead. Who? Is someone else going to speak? I was just going to say that I just remember the original definition of it being that, there's the yellow represented a sense of uncertainty, needing more information, clarity. And then in that meeting, there was several yellows that turned to green. Some of them turned to red, but it wasn't at all significant support necessarily what it represented, because significant support means like there's a strong sense of support for the recommendation, and that's, upon reading each of these contexts, that's not necessarily the case.
Jacqueline has her hand raised.
I'll lower it. I was just going to say that we've been calling it significant support since January. But I agree with Dr. Turner that when we did the dot exercise, and I'm sorry, I don't have the exact wording of it. We'd have to go back to the transcript for that meeting. But green was something that we were able to act on, that we were ready to go forward with. Red were things that we didn't agree with, and yellow were things that we wanted to explore further. I think it got translated into significant support because it wasn't a no, but it also wasn't a yes. And so that there was support for it. I would be okay with changing the term to um, needs further development or something along those lines, because that really was the spirit in which we were using the yellows. Though
Yeah.
we've been using the significant support terminology since January, early
Okay.
January.
Okay.
And I would,
Thanks for that.
It was 6:45.
I would add that at some point when I believe it was Member Baker presented this categorization of ideas, that was the term he used, and we all accepted that. As I recall it.
We all accepted it. What meeting was that? Was it like a vote or something? I apologize. I just don't remember that we all accepted that. And I just say I'm just saying that I disagree with the term significant support for being representative of yellow. I agree with the other member, Jacqueline. That maybe the word just significant does not speak to what yellow really represents. And
Well,
I don't remember myself even agreeing to that. So thank you.
I don't know that we took a vote. I don't know that you call it consensus. I know that there was no serious objection to it. And I also know from reviewing the categorization and the draft that in each case, anything with yellow also has some greens in it. So there is
And some reds.
support for it and some yellows,
And some
that-
reds.
maybe additional questions, but there is support for it.
And there's not support for some of them.
I'm sorry, I'm talking.
Okay,
think it's
well,
a
same thing
great-
goes to you when you interrupted me. So it goes,
Oh.
it's, you're trying to mislead my point. And I'm just saying that I did not, you said that I voted for this, that we all accepted this, and that's not true.
I don't know what you thought. I don't know if you were there. I know we discussed it, and I know that's the term we, generally speaking, as a group, accepted for those things that had some support, some opposition, and some questions. And I'll leave it right there.
So, this is Jonathan. So, is there a better term to capture this? This is the challenging part of doing a report like this, because one option is to do either something reaches consensus or it doesn't reach consensus. So it's one of two categories. We've done a third here because there was this large middle ground. I'm just throwing out warrants further discussion. Does that indicate something too strong? Is that a better alternative? Warrants further discussion?
Are we able to make significant changes at this date?
We can make changes. Each of you have had the opportunity to look at this over the last several weeks. And so this term's been in play for a while, but we obviously need to clarify that. So you have some options. So if you're wanting to be able to formally approve this, we need to make that decision now while we're convened. What we can't do is do a back and forth on email, because we're subject to Kansas Open Meetings Act. And so you can't have serial meetings or meetings online. So those kinds of significant formal decisions need to happen in the context of the meeting. So either we were to flesh it out, come with some agreed upon term here, and any kind of minor edits that you could approve, or if it's something more substantial that we need to rework, then we would need to ask for everyone to give input, and then we need to formally reconvene again as a work group at some later date, so that you could accept those.
But we established that we have quorum, so we could take a vote if that is something that we needed to do. I propose that we take a vote on it. I yield to Member Ricks.
Thank you. Because the last set of notes, and I could have missed this as well, but the last set of notes that I have for the yellow is just possible recommendation. So I don't know. So that's where I am with my last set of notes.
So, thank you, Member Rick. So that they were described as possible recommendations, but not, significant support. So, do you want to tell me where you're at as a group here? Do you want to, we've got possible recommendations.
I'd like to interject. I think we should be voting on whether or not we want to change the terminology and then decide on what terminology we want to vote on. If it passes that we want to change it.
Sure.
I propose a vote on, how do we say it? I'm not great with the rules.
Just changing significant support is, I mean, I think it just comes down to understanding what the terms actually mean and how they could be misleading. So technically, we're not a real board, and we haven't really followed this type of process. But Jonathan, if you want to kind of lead and facilitate as facilitator, that might be best.
Yeah, thank you. So what I'm hearing is that you're moving, that the group consider to make the edit to the draft report to replace the term significant support for the yellow items with some other term yet to be defined.
Yeah. And just because this is on record and it's been on record, what your original agenda was, what yellow had originally, the colors were originally defined as, that's on record too. And so since, you know, we just kind of all be on the same page about, you know, what these terms mean, what yellow really means, because you could be reading some of this context and see that there wasn't significant support for one of the recommendations with yellow. But yeah, I think Jacqueline's on it. I think we could just take a vote. It is what it is. So do we just want to use our yellow hands?
Or we can go around and.
Absolutely. So, so let's do just a roll call vote. And you can raise your hand if you're in support of the idea that that term needs to be changed from significant support to a different term to be more accurate description of what yellows are attempting to capture. Okay, I see Member Brickshis, Member Turner. Give me a thumbs up or raise your hand in support of Member McCann, Member Baker, Member Richardson. I'm not seeing other votes here. Just give a thumbs up.
Raise your
You don't have to
hand.
click on it.
The thumbs up disappears after a few minutes, so
Yeah,
it makes it hard to count.
It's a little tricky to use. Just wave your hand with a thumbs up. Your literal thumb, if you're supportive of it. Of the idea of
No
changing.
thumbs up, just the raise your hand if you support.
Okay, just raise your hand if you support it. And I see Member Kimball Williams is on there as well, but I don't know if you have a vote to weigh in. There you are, thank you. So this is, we're voting to make the change to the term for the yellow items, which receives some support, but not enough for consensus recommendation, but to strike significant support and replace it with a different term. Okay, well, that certainly passes. What we need to define is what the term is. And just to put it in context again, remember that when you put forward your recommendations, this receives some greens typically, but there were a lot of either people wanting more information or there are people that didn't support it. And so it didn't reach consensus. So we're just looking for a term to capture how you wish to describe that. So when the city commission reviews your report, it's clear that they're not consensus items, but they did receive some kind of meaningful discussion and might be worth exploring, or at least are noteworthy.
Member Ricks, what did you say that it was from your notes? Possible recommendation?
Yes. Possible recommendations, and that's the last set of notes that I had. And I think I've only missed one meeting, so I
It
don't
looks
ever
like-
remember it being significant support, but okay. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a suggestion in the chat from member Kim Williams, the term mixed support.
It looks like Brenda has her.
Well, my comment is simply, I remember this was how it was initially proposed. I don't recall any opposition to it. I also know from reviewing the documents that in each case, there was more than one person who liked the idea. But I have no problem with going to items that had some support and need further discussion. Something like that. I mean, it's less concise, but that's what it's really about. There was some support for this, some concern about this, and it needs further consideration.
I'll say that I wrote the entire transcript and I went back and reviewed, and I can say there was actually, I disagree with that. I say there was moments of intense debate, especially among recommendations for people's personal experiences and different, conversations surrounding different, recommendations and that, some support and that mixed support. I like the idea of possible recommendation even, but that mixed support is so true because there was some very intense conversations all the way back in the end of August, where there was some strong disagreement. There was some that, the yellows changed straight to red, and then that was that. There was some that changed to green in support. So, you're right. There might have not been any strong opposition to that. I did not hear it. I'm hearing impaired. So there's, but I would have, if I would have known or heard that, I probably would have said something. Because significant support, it means something entirely different than what yellow really originally meant.
I hear you on the hearing impaired. I had hearing aids and I still might have missed something, but it seemed to me that there were people in favor, people against, and a lot of discussion. And so there was support, just not a consensus.
Okay.
So do we like mixed support or needs further consideration more?
I like needs further consideration, honestly.
Is that something you could agree
I-
to, Dr. Turner?
I personally
you-
like support, and we had several instances where we were trying to get to our consensus recommendations. So there were some things that I know I can speak for myself that I may not have vocally spoke against just because they didn't seem to be strongly supported anyway or pointed out things. So I do like the mixed support. I think that's an accurate representation of what occurred.
Or can we do both, mixed support with further recommendation?
So that, in the chat there, that's one of the suggestions, and member Ricks just said, mixed support,
With
needs
further consideration.
consideration or warrants further consideration.
Harrison had the good one, mixed support, but warrant further consideration. I like that
Yes,
one.
yes.
I like
Yeah, that
that.
sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are
is
we
everybody
gonna vote on that?
Yeah, is everybody okay with that?
I move to vote on it. Roll call vote.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do a roll call vote. We're replacing the label, if you will, for the yellow items. Rather than stating significant support, we would now read mixed support, but warrants further consideration. All right, raise your hand. If you support that change. Okay, that, every one of you supported that, so that's great. All right, so we'll make that change throughout the document. So I think that's really helpful to clarify, better convey, what you're trying to communicate with that set of, ideas that were considered that didn't reach consensus. Okay, thank you for that. Anything else in the report that you wanted to address or speak to? Or had concerns about, or are you at a place where you're ready to approve the draft, as we have it?
I just have a very quick question. Will it go through another round of like grammar and minor spelling edits and stuff like that? Because I saw a couple as we were scrolling through that I'm just like, I see you, that are just real
Yeah.
tiny, like single quotes instead of double quotes, stuff like that.
There are several that I noticed as well that need to be cleared up. In addition to just some basic formatting things so that it will scroll better. So when I asked Casey about this, my understanding is if you are at a place where you are prepared to approve it, with that caveat that you need to make those final grammatical edits, as long as you're not doing anything that is content or anything significant beyond that, then you could approve the draft as is with the recognition that any minor grammatical edits and formatting issues be resolved, that would be acceptable.
I move to vote on that.
All right. It's
If necessary, I second.
all right. It's been moved and seconded that the draft final report be approved as is with current content, with the understanding that minor grammatical or formatting changes be made. And with that, it can then be made, can be published for the city commission. All those in favor? All right, so that's a unanimous support. So thank you very much. That's great, great accomplishment. Tons of work on your part to get it to that point. So very much appreciated. What we will need to do at this point to bring everything forward then is those minor edits, the formatting piece so that it will be consumable. Then it will be published, and the expectation is that the work group will present this to the city commission for their consideration. My understanding is that would take the form of a presentation in a work session in a regular city commission meeting, at which point this report would be formally presented. It would be published as part of the city commission's package. So the city commission and the public would be able to review it prior to the meeting, and then presented. And we need to talk just a few minutes about what that process looks like for the presentation. And then the commission will deliberate and make decisions and give us some initial insights or ideas of what they intend to do moving forward as they engage staff around what the next steps might look like.
Jonathan, one tweak, at a work session, they do not take action. They will not make decisions. They
Oh,
might
okay.
provide direction, but there won't be any formal action or decision.
Oh, okay, thank you. Did you all hear that? So when you present as a work group at the city commission meeting, it'll be a work session, but a work session specifically means they don't formally take action. So they'll ask questions, they'll be prepared to look at it, but we're not going to be able to walk away from that meeting saying, and here's what they decided on our 18 consensus recommendations. That will come in a subsequent meeting. Do you have any?
If we're directed. I mean, it sort of depends on the recommendation or, the direction that they provide at that
Okay.
work session, but that's the distinction. It's not
Okay.
gonna have, accept all of these recommendations. Obviously, a 60-page report, when they get it on a Thursday, they're not
Yeah.
gonna be prepared to take action on 4 days later. So
Okay,
if they say, bring us back a resolution that says XYZ, that, you know, we would come back at that point. If, it just depends on what their direction is. I hope that makes sense to
yeah.
everybody.
Does anyone have any questions on that? And I suppose we can know or ask how soon that next step would be then, so.
They'll probably provide that.
Yeah. So essentially, you've done all this heavy lift, you bring all this work together, and now you're launching it to the next phase. And so we see where that goes and how long that takes from here. What questions do you have about next steps in the process?
Jonathan, do we have a date out there? And the other question is Harrison still presenting this information?
As
Yeah,
long as
so-
my sore throat has recovered, I am perfectly fine presenting the information, or at
Thanks,
least I should
Harrison.
be.
Thanks, Harrison.
Yeah, so in terms of the date, I don't know that, we've had a couple of attempts at it, but we haven't been ready because we needed to keep working on the report. So, my hope is that we could find our way onto the February 20th, agenda now that you all have approved this. So there will be a commission meeting tomorrow night, which obviously we will be a part of. But the next commission meeting after that will be on the 20th. So that would be my hope. Because if not, that's the last in February, and then it pushes into first week of March. Casey, do you have any guidance for us on that or anything to?
I thought you said it really well. The agenda packet has to be published the Thursday before the Tuesday, so that's kind of a quick turnaround. Yes, I think you said it right, that it'd be nice to be able to get it on the 20th, and that's entirely possible.
Okay.
Harrison, did you have a lot of things that need to get done? Because it sounds like the deadline for submission is Thursday. And is that possible?
I think it should be possible. The edits I think I saw were very small, but I would want Jonathan to send me a Word document of what he sent out today so I could just do track changes. But they seemed very small from what I saw.
So in our earlier discussions in terms of the presentation, we had spent some of our meeting time talking about what that might look like, but the bulk of our efforts have been focused on producing the report itself. But just to bring that full circle, a few of you had offered up to either help develop or actually be a part of that presentation. So I want to just make sure. So Member Baker's step forward, much appreciated. Member Turner, you'd also indicated an interest in helping to be part of that presentation. And a few of you made the comment that it would be nice to have different voices from the group, given the representation on the group of CPRB and community rep perspective. So where do you all stand on that in terms of who and how, and then we need to talk about how we prep for that.
Hey, Jonathan, I thought and maybe we didn't agree to it, but what I remember being discussed is a CPRB member, a police department member, and a community member presenting together.
Yeah, that was also discussed. So let's just pin this down as a group. How do you want to proceed and who wants to be in on this? And I think the qualifier was that it's ideal to probably not have more than 3 voices, but certainly more impactful when you have more than one. So if we just went with 3, the work group is constituted of community reps, CPRB reps, and police department reps. So if we went with 1 from each, it'd be 3. And Dr. Turner, are you still interested in that role?
Um, yeah, I'm comfortable filling that role. Or is this something that we're wanting to vote on? I feel like I thought you had mentioned that you had the three in mind that you had indicated, but is this something that you're wanting us to vote on, or?
It's ultimately your all's decision. I'll work, I'm here to support your efforts in whatever way. So, I don't want anybody to present that doesn't want to present. I also don't want to overlook anybody who's, offered up, that is interested in presenting.
Okay, is there anyone among the police members that would like to present, or?
Well, I defer to the chief, see what he wants as far as if he wants to present or if he wants someone else to.
Yeah, I thought we were thinking that Ian would present from the officer's perspective since they're the largest group.
Member McCann, is that, something you're interested in doing?
Yeah, if that's need be, I can do that. It's not a problem.
Okay, so, thank you. So you'd be representing this from, Lawrence Police Officers Association, perspective, and then more broadly from the PD, Member Baker representing the community reps. And then we just need to confirm, who's one representing the CPRB.
Dr. Turner.
Yeah, Dr. Turner.
All right. So
Right.
What? I'm sorry.
You would be representing the CPRB and the presentation team, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so, so what we need to do is the four of us, get together and map out what that's gonna look like. I did ask all of you, all 12 of you for, 2 or 3 ideas that you felt most important to convey to the, city commission as part of the presentation. So I appreciate all of the responses that I received on that. The gist of it was to emphasize the, importance of the consensus recommendations. And so, if I were to distill everything that you sent back in terms of feedback, it was some version of focus on the 18 things that we all supported. And from a practicality standpoint, that's already a fairly heavy lift to give to the city commission and city staff to ultimately carry forward. But, that was, probably the plurality of the feedback that I received was, specifically to that, to say, that focus on the 18. Anything else that you want to emphasize to make sure that your 3 reps here capture the essence of your work and recognize that it's only about a, 10-minute presentation or something like that.
However long.
And then it will be Q&A. So whatever the commission wants to ask, and, we're here to support one another through that. So you're not gonna be out on a limb by yourself on that. But, anything else you want to emphasize in the context of this meeting that you want to make sure that the three people incorporate into the presentation?
Yeah, I apologize for not being as participating as much in the recent meetings. I think the one thing that I would, I'm going to think about it too. I'll send you an email, Jonathan, if I have other thoughts. But the first thing that comes to mind is the cost of this collaboration on the part of the group members and also on the community members that we researched and collected their input, that this wasn't an easy lift, your own work, Jonathan, too, of convening and facilitating and the extra meetings, all of the prep work that went into printing things and creating that space and ordering food, like literally from start to finish. It was came at a great cost and an emotional cost for some members. And yeah, I would just put probably that. I think that would help the commission members to appreciate and maybe read the material in a certain way. And it might influence how they might do this in the future or reconduct something like this potentially, maybe allocating a lot of resources towards it or support for it. I could go on and on about it, but just let me know if you have questions about that. But that's something that I would put forward.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's absolutely worth noting that not only did it take a very long time for this to get launched, but we had a couple of delays once we were launched. And so I appreciate that. And as you said, that's the costs and the notable costs and everything. And also just the difficult nature of the topics and navigating it well and not well and all that involved. So thank you for that.
I'd like to emphasize that this was a narrow scope and that what we just had a pretty rousing discussion about what green, yellow, red means. And I don't want it to get lost in the presentation. Not just like what the colors mean, but that the concepts themselves, there were some things that we were able to, within the limited scope of what we had, that we were able to get some traction on. But the focus of this group was time bounded and it was a narrow focus. And that with the participants, there was a lot more work that needs to be done. And this is what we can get to right now. I would hate to see this report with these recommendations to not get further scrutiny, maybe by a different group of people at a different time. But I don't want it to just be, let's do the greens and then that'll be a perfect process. I think the greens are a good start.
Jack, thank you. I mean, honestly, all of the ideas are worthwhile. Some of them have limited support, some had more support, some had more questions than others. But the reality is, I think what everybody wants is a process that will provide a sufficient scope of oversight. And, you know, my target on this, honestly, is expansion of the scope to include all complaints. If your goal is to catch bias-based bad policing, you got to look at all complaints, not create a threshold hurdle of showing the bias, but all complaints, and well, that's the main thing, you know, to clarify the responsibilities of the CPRB generally, but to expand the scope of its responsibilities to where it can actually get some productive work done. So thanks, Jack. And do I agree with every little classification and every little detail in all of this? No, I don't. But there's nothing I can't live with, and I want to put it in front of the city commission. And I'm willing to do anything I can do to help get that done and done in an effective manner.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's a great paraphrasing of consensus, as you stated that. But just to circle back with Member Nance Mangler's comment about the narrowness of the scope and the importance of looking at not only the 18 greens, but all the other ideas there and moving forward, and to Member Clary's comment about the wanting to make sure that the significance of the fact that you're recommending that the CPRB look at complaints, all level 1, level 2 complaints, and not just limited to race-based or other bias-based policing, as it currently states, was one of the most significant. And so there's a lot of work to be done around that. So That's a heavy lift and work to be applauded. Okay, anything else that you want to speak to before we draw this to a close?
Thank you to everybody. I don't agree with you all the time, but I appreciate what you contributed and don't think I didn't go home thinking about it.
All right, thank you for that. Well, I would just like to say a special thank you to each of you. It's been a delight getting to know you, to work with you, to hear your professional insights, your personal insights and expertise. I really appreciate the way you've engaged with one another. As I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, you each expressed a sense of hope for the work, varying levels of trepidation about what we're about to engage in. And you did it, and you did great work and came out on the other side, and the community's for the better for it. So I very much appreciate that. It's been a delight and pleasure. I had some idea of what I was getting into, but certainly not all of this, and certainly didn't think it was going to take as long as it did. And so I appreciate you all sticking all the way through it, and that we were able to get it across the finish line. Special thank you to the city for all the supports. For those of you who weren't able to make it in person last week, Casey shared with each of you that the city has a certificate and lapel pin as a thank you for your efforts. Once it's notified of when we're appearing on the agenda, soon it's on February 20th, I would invite and encourage all of you to attend, to be there and support your colleagues who are presenting, but just to be witness to that, and at the very least tune into that. And I'm very excited to see how your work carries forward, and I will do everything in my role to emphasize the importance of bringing this many people from the community to Member Kimball Williams' point about the fatigue of not accessing and making use of people's inputs. That's what we've been able to leverage, but we have a responsibility to our community when we do that to make sure that good efforts come from that, and people can see results accordingly. And so I want to emphasize that as well. But thank you all for your efforts, for your patience, for your commitment, for your great ideas, and for everything that you brought forward. And look forward to seeing you in the future and running into you in the grocery store, and celebrating with each of you as we see good things come from the great work that you did. So with that, I'd like to draw it to a close or ask if anybody has any other comments.
Jonathan, Member Nance
Yes.
Mangler has something to say.
I just had a question.
Yes.
When we go to support them, do we have the date and time, or can that be emailed as a reminder to us
So
and with
I
the
will-
location?
So as soon as I know it officially, I will email that to all of you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And then, and just technically, and Casey, correct me if I'm off on this. So we're a public body, and we're a public body until we're not a public body. And I don't know if that means as soon as this meeting's over, we're done, or if I think it means not until the presentation is done. So please be mindful that, so is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to leave open the possibility of some direction from the commission when you present your recommendations. So I would think that is correct. Until after that presentation.
That isn't where I was going with that,
But yeah,
my point being,
Coma and Cora still apply.
Coma and Cora still apply. So we're not to, 7 of you go hang out at a restaurant all together and talk about this business, because you then constitute a quorum. So for another week and a half, and until you hear further, please be cognizant of the same discipline that you've had all throughout this process, that we're not to engage in this work outside of a public meeting, other than what you've routed through my role as facilitator And if you're talking to one or two other members, you're fine there. We just can't do serial meetings through emails or constitute quorum outside of a formal meeting. And so once all that is also cleared up, then we'll send out a formal communication. And then at that point, we would formally disband as a work group. My work was specific only to this group as originally identified in the contract. So I go away, we go away as a group, and as I said, we run into each other in the grocery store and so. All right, anyone else have any final comments? Questions? All right, well, thank you so much. Much appreciated. Hope to see you on the 20th. And thank you again for all of your great work.
Thank you all.
Right.